It was a Tuesday evening in November when my wife finally said out loud what I suspected she'd been thinking for months. We were standing in the kitchen, the same kitchen I had renovated with my own hands 3 summers ago, tearing out rotted subflooring on my knees for 11 straight days, while she visited her sister in Scottsdale. The overhead light hummed the way it always did when the temperature dropped. Our youngest, Cooper, was in the next room watching cartoons. Our older one, Lily, was at the table doing homework with her earbuds in, though I noticed she had pulled one out. Sandra opened the refrigerator, stared into it for a long moment, then let the door swing shut. She turned to me and said it the way someone says something they've been rehearsing. "You know what? Go buy your own groceries from now on. Stop freeloading off me. This is my house, my paycheck, my food." I was holding a dish towel. I set it on the counter. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't list the 18 years of my life I had poured into that house, that marriage, those children. I didn't mention that I had spent the last 4 months between contracts after my employer restructured, and that I had already lined up new work starting the first of the year. I didn't explain any of that. She knew all of it. She had chosen to say this anyway. And in front of Lily, who had now taken out both earbuds, I just said, "Okay." She blinked. She had expected a fight. "Okay," she repeated. "Okay." I said again. Then I folded the dish towel, set it next to the sink, and walked upstairs. That night I lay in bed for a long time thinking about who I had become inside this marriage and who I used to be before it. I met Sandra when I was 27, at a fundraiser for a children's literacy program that a colleague had dragged me to. She was smart and sharp and laughed at things other people missed. We were married 2 years later in a small ceremony in her parents' backyard in Ohio. I thought we were building something together. For most of our first decade, I believe we were, but somewhere in the last 4 or 5 years, a shift had happened that I could never quite name while I was inside of it. Sandra had moved into a regional director role at her company, and the income gap between us had widened significantly. I was proud of her for it, but pride? I had learned. I can curdle into something else when it isn't returned. She started keeping score in ways I hadn't noticed at first. Small comments about whose car we were taking, whose credit card was used at dinner, whose name was on the utility account. None of it was said directly. It was always wrapped in something that sounded almost like a joke, until the Tuesday in November when it wasn't a joke anymore. I went to the grocery store the next morning before she woke up. I bought a small cooler, the kind with wheels, and I put it in the corner of the garage. I stocked it with my food. I labeled nothing. I simply separated what was mine. I started cooking for myself in the early mornings before anyone else came downstairs. I left her kitchen exactly as I found it. I washed my pan, dried it, put it back. I made no comment and no complaint. The first few days, I think she expected me to crack, to come downstairs and say, "This is ridiculous. Sandra, let's talk." That was the script. I had followed that script so many times I had worn grooves in it. I didn't follow it this time. By the end of the first week, she had started watching me in a different way. Not with contempt, with something more like uncertainty. I recognized it because I had felt it myself in the early months of our trouble. That unsettling moment when you realize the other person has stopped reacting the way you need them to. I kept being useful. I drove the kids where they needed to go. I fixed the gutter that had been pulling away from the fascia since September. I showed up at Cooper's Thursday night soccer practice with his shin guards that he'd left in my car. I did not stop being a father or a functioning adult. I simply stopped engaging with Sandra on the terms she had set. She tried a few times to provoke a response. One evening, she said loudly, to no one in particular, that it must be nice to have so much free time during the day. I was at the kitchen table reviewing a contract addendum for the job that started January 3rd. I looked up, nodded once, and looked back down. Another time she told her friend Renata, within earshot of me, that some people in the house thought they could just coast along indefinitely. Renata glanced at me with an expression that was half embarrassment and half curiosity. I smiled at Renata and asked if she wanted more coffee. She said yes. Sandra's birthday was January 18th. She had been planning the party since October. That was her way. She loved production. She loved being the center of a room, and she was genuinely good at it. She had reserved the large dining room addition at our house for a gathering she described to everyone as an intimate family dinner, which in Sandra's vocabulary meant 20 to 30 people, and a catered spread. She had contracted a local catering company, a woman named Diane who did upscale home events and whose pulled brisket I had eaten once at a neighbor's party and still thought about. Sandra had coordinated the menu herself. Flowers, a custom cake from the bakery on Mercer Street that charged as much for a single-layer cake as most places charged for a wedding tier. She had sent invitations in early December. 23 confirmed guests. Her parents, her 2 brothers and their families, several cousins, a handful of close friends, her work colleague Renata, and Renata's husband. What Sandra had not done, what it had apparently never occurred to her to consider, was think through the logistics of running a home event for 23 people, when the person who had always managed those logistics behind the scenes was no longer participating. I want to be precise here, because the details matter. I had always been the one who handled the house before any large gathering. Not because Sandra asked me to, but because I was the one who noticed when the second-floor bathroom had a slow drain that would become a crisis with heavy use. I was the one who made sure there were enough coat hooks in the entryway, and enough extension cords for the warming trays, enough ice in the auxiliary cooler in the garage. I was the one who replaced the outdoor porch lights the week before Christmas so that arrivals in the dark wouldn't feel unwelcoming. This time, I did none of those things. Not out of spite, I want to be clear about that even now. But she had told me this was her house and her domain, and that I was a guest consuming her resources. I had taken her at her word. The first guests arrived at 6:30 on a Saturday evening. Sandra had been getting ready since 4. She came downstairs at 6:15 looking genuinely beautiful, a dark green dress she had bought for the occasion. Her hair done. The kind of composed and elegant she had always been capable of being when she put her attention toward it. I was sitting in the living room in a clean button-down and dark slacks. Reading. She stopped when she saw me. "You're dressed," she said. "It's a party." I said. I don't know what she had expected. Maybe that I would disappear for the evening. Maybe that I would make myself invisible in my own home. It had not, apparently, occurred to her that I had nowhere else to be and no reason to leave. Her parents arrived first, Gerald and Maureen, who had always been decent to me and who I genuinely liked. Gerald shook my hand. Maureen hugged me and asked how the new position was going. I told her it started in 2 weeks and I was looking forward to it. She patted my arm. The rest came in waves. Her brother Dennis with his wife Carol and their 3 teenagers. Her brother Patrick, who drove up from Louisville with his girlfriend. Cousin. Colleagues. Friends. The catering team arrived at 6:45 and moved through the kitchen with the practiced efficiency of people who did this every weekend. For the first hour, it was a party. Sandra was luminous in that way. She could be telling a story in the center of a group, laughing at exactly the right moments, making everyone feel like they were exactly where they should be. I stayed on the edges of it, talking to Gerald about the season his college team had put together, helping Cooper find his good shoes, keeping Lily from disappearing entirely into her phone. It started coming apart around 7:45. The catering team's lead, a composed young woman named, I would later learn, Becca, approached Sandra quietly near the hallway. I was close enough to hear, "Mrs. Hartwell, I just want to confirm the additional table in the sunroom. The folding table with the linens. I don't see it set up." Sandra looked at her. It should be in the storage room off the garage, Becca said gently. We looked. There's a cooler in there and some boxes, but no folding table. Sandra's composure held. Check the basement. The folding table was not in the basement either. It was, as I could have told anyone who asked, in the storage unit we rented on Whitfield Road. Because the previous fall I had taken it there along with the outdoor furniture to make room for the new furnace installation. Sandra had never asked where it went. I had told her, and she had looked at her phone during the telling. Becca came back. Sandra's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She asked if the event could proceed without the additional table. Becca said they could make adjustments, but it would mean some guests would be eating in the living room on trays rather than seated. I watched Sandra process this. Then she found me across the room. I met her eyes and said nothing. She broke away from the conversation and walked over to me. She was smiling with her mouth, but not with the rest of her face. Where is the folding table? Whitfield Road Storage, I said. Bay 14. The code is still 4379. Why didn't you bring it home? I looked at her for a moment. You told me this was your house to manage. I've been taking you at your word. The smile stopped trying. That was the beginning. The folding table was merely the most visible of a series of small failures that accumulated across the next 40 minutes in a way that must have felt, from Sandra's position, like the floor slowly giving way. The second-floor bathroom drained so slowly that after the first 3 guests used it, Sandra's cousin Tiffany came downstairs and quietly mentioned to Sandra that there might be an issue. There was a bottle of drain opener in the cabinet under the kitchen sink. I knew exactly where it was. I had been the one who bought it in October. Anticipating this, no one asked me. I said nothing. The extension cords for the catering team's warming trays were not where Sandra assumed they would be. The outdoor porch light on the left side, the one I had not replaced, flickered badly every time the temperature outside dropped, which was every time the front door opened. Gerald's knee was bothering him, and he asked if there was anywhere comfortable to sit that wasn't the low-set sectional in the living room. The high-backed chair from the study where I always put it for events like this was still in the study. I went and got it, Gerald said. Thanks. Marcus. He said it quietly, not making anything of it. By 8:15, Sandra's mother, Maureen, had drifted to my side of the room. She was sharp in the way that mothers who have been quietly observing for decades become sharp. She didn't say anything about what was happening. She asked me how Lily was doing with the transition to middle school. I told her Lily was doing better than expected, and that her language arts teacher had recommended her for an advanced composition elective. Maureen said she had always known Lily was a writer. Then she said, just before she moved away, "You're a patient man, Marcus." I wasn't sure if it was a compliment. Sandra found me again at 8:30. In the kitchen doorway. Marcus. Her voice was very quiet now, controlled in the way that something is controlled when it costs effort. Yeah, I said. The drain in the upstairs bathroom. The cords. The outdoor light. The table. She stopped. She looked at me. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. You knew. You knew all of this, and you told me it wasn't my house. I said. I was trying to respect that. Something moved through her face that I had not seen there in a very long time. It might have been grief. It might have been the first honest recognition of what the last several months had actually been. The guests she started. The guests are fine, I said. Becca's team is good at their job. Gerald found a comfortable seat. The bathroom will survive the night. I paused. But I think you and I need to have a real conversation soon. Not tonight, but soon. She looked at me for another long moment. What did you do? She asked. It was almost exactly what you'd ask someone who had just beaten you at a game you didn't know you were playing. I said. Exactly what you told me to. Then I went to check on Cooper, who had gotten into the shrimp cocktail and was deeply pleased with himself about it. The party ended around 10:30. People hugged Sandra, wished her well, told her it was lovely. Most of them meant it. It had, by most external measures, been a fine evening. But the people who knew this family, who had known Sandra and Marcus Hartwell long enough to read the spaces between things, left a little more quietly than they might have otherwise. Maureen held my hand at the door for just a moment before she and Gerald headed to their car. Dennis lingered near the entryway. He and I had always gotten along. He clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Let's grab lunch this month." I told him I'd like that. The catering team cleaned up and were gone by 11. Sandra sat at the kitchen table. I made 2 cups of tea without asking the kind she likes. Peppermint, with a small spoon of honey, and I set one in front of her and sat down across from her. She looked at the tea. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "I've been awful to you." I let the words sit in the air for a moment before I answered, "Because they deserve that. You've been in pain," I said, "and you took it out on me. That's different from awful. But it also can't keep happening." She wrapped her hands around the mug. "I don't know when I started keeping score. I know when," I said. "It was after the Mercer Street deal fell through and your department absorbed the losses. You started coming home different after that. I should have named it then. I didn't." She was quiet for a long time. "I didn't mean it." She said, "What I said? About the food. About freeloading. I know you didn't mean it the way you said it." I said, "But you said it. In front of Lily. I kept my voice even. That's the part that stays." Sandra closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, there was something raw in her expression that I recognized as the actual Sandra, not the director. Not the scorekeeper. Not the woman who had rehearsed a line in a kitchen to wound me with, but the person I had married in her parents' backyard in Ohio when neither of us had anything figured out. "What do we do?" she asked. "We talk to someone," I said. "A real someone. Not your sister. Not Renata. A professional." I wrapped my hands around my own mug. "And we stop pretending this house belongs to only one of us." She nodded. She nodded for a long time. The way people nod when they are agreeing to more than just the words. "I want to tell you this isn't the ending where everything healed cleanly and immediately. That's not how real things work." The weeks after Sandra's birthday were uncomfortable and honest in equal measure. We found a couples therapist, a woman named Dr. Anita Welburn, who had a measured, observant quality that made it difficult to perform in her presence, which was exactly what we needed. Sandra showed up to every session. So did I. Some of them were very hard. A few were harder than anything we'd fought about in the kitchen. What came out, over months, was a picture I think I had half known but hadn't let myself fully see. Sandra had been terrified. Not of me, of the version of our lives she'd constructed in her head where I was coasting and she was carrying. Where the income gap meant the responsibility gap meant the power gap. A set of equations she'd built out of fear and exhaustion and never said aloud to me because she didn't know how. So she said them wrong. She said them in the worst possible way. In the worst possible moment. In front of our daughter and I. Dr. Welborn was careful to note this had spent 18 months absorbing quiet humiliations and filing them away rather than naming them. I had become so practiced at not reacting that I had tipped over into something passive and cold. And yes, a little strategic. The birthday. The table. The extension cords. I hadn't sabotaged anything, but I had let her stand in what she'd made. And some part of me had found satisfaction in that part, Dr. Welburn suggested gently, was also worth examining. Cooper and Lily don't know the full story. And they don't need to. What they know is that their parents started talking to each other differently. Lily said to me one evening, while I was driving her to a writing workshop she'd joined, "You and Mom seem less." She searched for the word separate. "Yeah," I said. "Good." she said. Then she put her earbud back in. I started my new position on January 3rd. As scheduled. The work is good. The team is good. There was a period, and I'm not proud of it, where the job had felt like something I was waiting on mostly to prove a point to Sandra. Now it just feels like work that I'm glad to do. Sandra got a national award from her company in March. I sat in the second row at the ceremony with her parents and her brothers. When they called her name and she walked to the podium, Gerald leaned over and said, quietly, "She was always going to do something like this." "I know," I said, and I meant it cleanly. Without the residue I would have felt 4 months earlier. She thanked her team and her company and, at the end, her family. She didn't name me specifically. She didn't need to. She found my face in the second row and held it for a moment, and that was its own language. There is a version of this story that ends with a man triumphant and a woman humiliated. And I understand why people want that version. It's satisfying in the clean, bright way that uncomplicated things are satisfying. But that's not what happened here. And if I told it that way, I'd be doing what Sandra did in our kitchen that November night, using the truth as a weapon rather than a map. What actually happened is that two people who had stopped seeing each other clearly were forced. By a party that ran out of extension cords and a bathroom that wouldn't drain, to finally stand in the same room with the same problem and admit they both had a hand in it. The folding table stayed at Whitfield Road until February. When I finally brought it home, Sandra helped me carry it through the garage. Neither of us mentioned the irony of that. We just carried the table.